You ready? Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, great. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll call the December 5th, 2024 meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission to order. Can we have the roll, please?
Yes, let's see. Commissioner Sibley.
Here.
Commissioner Fenster.
Here.
Commissioner Tarrick.
Here.
Chairman Lane.
Here.
Commissioner Norton.
Here.
Commissioner Jacoby.
Here.
Commissioner Barnard.
Here.
Councilmember Mayor Peck.
Here.
Thank you.
Wonderful, full house. Okay, first order of business is the approval of the November 7th meeting minutes. Do any commissioners have any corrections? I understand maybe there's a couple of minor ones.
A couple of minor ones on mine, changes in the date fix that I gave to Maria, and nothing to really speak about.
Okay. Any other commissioners have any questions or comments on the minutes? And if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve them as amended with minor corrections.
Move to approve them as amended. Second.
Okay, I've got a motion from Commissioner Jacoby and a second from Commissioner Fenster for approval of the minutes. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None, so minutes are approved as amended. Okay, next is report from the chair. I do not have anything specific this evening, so we'll move on to our communication from HPC staff liaison.
Good evening, members of the commission. I have a few items of update. We have not had any administrative certificates of appropriateness since the November meeting, nor have we had any applications for commission level review either. I would expect that to pick up when things get a little warmer and we get a little closer to spring. The other item, Saving Places Conference, is January 29th through February 1st. It is in Colorado Springs this year at the Cheyenne Mountain Resort. As in previous years, the city will cover cost of registration for the conference. We were able to secure CLG scholarship funds to cover lodging for 3 of the commissioners, the first 3 who got to me when I sent out the request. So Commissioners Barnard, Sibley, and Tarrick just touch base with me and I will tell you what needs to happen. Otherwise, I will be sending out the lodging information. There is a conference rate for the rooms. It's pretty reasonable. And I just ask that you'd let me know by Monday at the latest if you intend to go, so that we can get everyone registered. We're playing the end of the year. Hey, we have some budget stuff that we need to use, so let's go ahead and get things taken care of. So so if you'll get that information, if you intend to go, let me know by Monday, and I will do a block registration for the conference, as it were. Folks who have the lodging covered by the CLG scholarship, touch base with me and I'll send you I'll send everyone the lodging information. So it is a reimbursement scholarship, so you'll just need to keep track of everything. So that is the big item. The other thing of note is that we have a annexation under consideration called Beaupre Farms, and this is the property that we did discuss at the March 2023 meeting as part of the Terry Lake Sewer Project. So there were some historic farm buildings on the site. It was associated with the Nishida family. Ultimately, the county, as well as with input from this commission, were able to get that sewer line rerouted so it would not impact those buildings. The current proposal does not include preservation of the farm buildings, which naturally, but I have advised the city's project planner that there will need to be coordination with the commission regarding these buildings and a preservation plan of some sort, particularly since we did go through the effort to, ensure that they weren't taken out by the sewer project. So I can request that the applicant attend an upcoming HPC meeting, either the January or February. I will leave that to the commission. As far as, January might be a little tough just because it is right at the beginning of the month. But I think it's worthwhile getting the applicant for that annexation to come speak to the commission as far as what the commission's expectations are, and going back to the recommendations from the Terry Lake Sewer Project, as well as, Boulder County had indicated that the properties, the buildings would be eligible under the county's standards for designation as well. So I am working with our staff to see what we can do about that, because there's already been work to preserve the buildings through the capital project. So makes sense, I think, and I think it's this commission's intent to do what we can as well, especially considering their association with a prominent Japanese farming family in this community, and the larger focus on recognizing historic assets in the state that are associated with underrepresented communities as well. So I'll see what I can do to get the applicant at a meeting either January or February. Related to that, looking at retreat dates, the council retreat, my understanding, Mayor Peck, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been advised that the council retreat is scheduled for February 21st and 22nd. So we'll just need to avoid that particular weekend. So, we typically do those earlier in the year, so just keep that in mind. And I'll, if you can if you want to check your calendars and send me some dates. We typically, for the new commissioners, do these on Saturdays, typically, most of a day. And Maria and I will work to see what spaces might be available as well. Last year we did hold it at the Callahan House. And so we'll see what we can find as far as available spaces. And that is what I have.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, if we can do the retreat, a lot of times what we have done is, for example, the Saving Places conference is early February, late January. We've canceled that first meeting in February and done the retreat at the same time. So maybe the 8th would be appropriate if that worked. The 8th. That might be ideal, and maybe a backup date is the 15th. And if everyone wants to kind of check their schedules for those 2 days and hold, I think that would be maybe the appropriate strategy if that could work.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff from commissioners? No? Okay. All right. Thank you for the updates. You hit all of the topics that I had on my list. Okay, next would be the public hearing. We have no signups, and I don't see anyone in the audience who is not otherwise here for some business, so I will open and close the public hearing. And then we'll move on to our first order of new business, which is a presentation on the Colorado 250, 150 year commemoration.
You'll want to be pretty close to the mic so that it records everything.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you for having me here today. I grew up in Longmont, so and my parents actually still live here. They live in a house that is part of a National Register district that was created the same month that I was born. So I feel like preservation's in my blood. I'm also in the unenviable position of having to present before one of my bosses, Dr. Holly Norton. So no, you're good. So I'm Damien. Yeah, thanks. I'm Damien Pachota with History Colorado. I'm a National and State Register historian. There are now 3 of us on staff at History Colorado. We split up the state. 2 of us split up the state. One does the southwestern portion of the state, and I do the north and eastern part of the state. And I'm lucky that Boulder County and Longmont fall within my district. Today, the 250-150 project is commemorating the 150th celebration of Colorado becoming a state in 1876 and the United States becoming a country in 1776. So the celebration will occur obviously in 2026. There are a host of different things that are occurring both at the state level and local levels, and there's different conversations being had between different communities of how to recognize this event. History Colorado is playing a big part of this. I'll be honest, a lot of this stuff still feels like it's kind of being developed. And so I don't have a whole lot to talk about with those things. And given that you're the Preservation Commission, I feel like the best one to talk about is the one that actually is in development, which is the Colorado Heritage for All program, which is aiming to add 150 sites to the national and state registers by the end of 2026 in celebration for the 150th birthday of the state, but also to kind of think about changing how preservation functions. There is another one that I'll highlight a little bit that's of roadside markers and signs. You'll notice if you go back east that there's those nice signs that are alongside the roads, and Colorado does not have those. They are now working on a development plan to start implementing those and start doing 150 signs around Colorado commemorating the 150th celebration in the year 2026. That's still in early development though, but if you're interested in any sites, there will be community meetings, so I would highlight that. And if you have any ideas in mind, certainly Dr. Norton is aware of it, but please come to me. And while I don't work for that program, I can put you in touch with the right people. So the program that I do work directly for is the Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, and the Heritage for All program does fall within that. And so, as I mentioned, the aim is to add 150 sites to the national and state registers by 2026. This is largely in part due to a study that was done in 2020 that looked at Colorado's current state and national register sites and found that only 4% of the sites listed actually represent underrepresented communities, including Black, Indigenous, Latino, Chicano, Asian American, LGBT, and women and individuals in the disability community and so forth. And this was alarming to a lot of people. Honestly, this is pretty typical across the National Register, across the country. But nevertheless, Colorado saw an opportunity, and History Colorado saw an opportunity to maybe change how this is done and how preservation is done to start reflecting. So 150 sites honestly won't make that big of a dent, but the idea is to change how we perceive preservation and how we can move forward with a different mindset around preservation tactics. The part of the 4% is, or part of the 96% is really that preservation focused heavily on architecture for a long time. One of my favorite examples in Denver is the Molly Brown House, which is listed for its architecture, but does not mention or recognize Molly Brown in any way. So that's the sort of thing that we're starting to change of how do we look at preservation and how do we record this history. And the National Register is making it a little bit easier in the sense that in the last 10 to 15 years, they've started adding some subcategories, including LGBTQ+. Before that, it was never part of the National Register. So one big part of this and one big part of the 100-250 project and Heritage for All is the importance of community engagement. It's really important to not just have the state coming in and saying, hey, this is what we're doing, because that's not authentic or correct of doing so. Really, we want the perspectives of the people and the communities to be telling us what sites are important to them, to reflect not only the celebration of the 150, 250, but also what should we be adding to the National Register that are telling their stories effectively. And a lot of these communities have been overlooked. This photo was one I took about a month ago. It was a very snowy night, but the Brighton Buddhist Japanese community came out for it, and I was very grateful. I was expecting one or two, and all of these people came out, which was amazing. And when the year started, 2024, we only had 2 sites on the National Register in Colorado related to the Asian American community. We're now up to 9, and this was the Brighton Buddhist. This is actually inside what used to be the Brighton Buddhist Temple. It's now a brewery. And they were we're adding that to the state register, recognizing this important community in Brighton. I'll talk a little bit later about Longmont's Buddhist community too. Another part of this is increasing access. So one of the things that I'm doing here and letting you all know about, and you can share with the community, is that we are starting to try and make it easier for the community to get engaged. If you've ever looked at a national or state forum, they were very difficult to actually put together, and you really needed to hire consultants to do that. The National Register, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of say in that because NPS dictates that, but the state forum, we've actually worked with the state board members to really develop a new form that makes it easier for anybody to fill out. And I say anybody, that maybe is a little disingenuous because it's still a long form, but nevertheless, it really walks you through all of the steps and asks you all the relevant questions for filling it out. And with that, we're working with students and community members and volunteers to really kind of develop these stories for the communities. And we're also using multi-property documentation forms and surveys to identify other sites. And so there's been a lot of LGBTQ plus work. We've received an underrepresented community grant from the National Park Service on LGBT history to do a focus on the Denver metro area. And while there's been talk about trying to include Boulder in that, there's question of how far into Boulder County that will go. But we've also secured funding from the Gill Foundation to do a statewide survey. So both of those will be looking at 25 sites and adding at least 3 to 5 sites to the National Register related to the LGBT community. We also got an underrepresented community grant related to African American travel sites. A few are here in Boulder County. None are in Longmont, unfortunately, but there were also women's suffrage sites, which some touch Boulder County and Longmont, as well as a host of other studies that not only that we've done and what we're doing, but also the communities have done. And we know Longmont is very much interested in that and involved in that. Obviously, the outcomes I've mentioned all along, which is to create more community engagement, make it easier for communities to develop these registration processes themselves. I should note with the state register, some community members say we really want this national, but we don't know how to fill it out. And I say, fill out the state register, and then it's my job to put it into the national register form because we just move it in. And so there, even with the newer forms, it doesn't restrict people from seeking the national register. It's still that kind of stepping stone to get people there. So we're not limiting them and saying, no, just because of the accessibility, you can only do state. We're really helping them, aid them into getting as far as they want to go. So here are some examples that we've done last year. I mentioned that this was the third site that we added around the Asian American community. This is the Far East Center in Denver. It's a wonderful story about the Little Saigon district and a family that were refugees, multiple families that were refugees during the Vietnam War who came to Denver and started this center as a place for everybody to come together and really be part of their community. It's actually the only center that's still owned by a Vietnamese family in the Little Saigon district. Most have been bought by out-of-state corporations at this point. Boggsville is another one that is a good example of an amendment. Boggsville was already on the National Register and is an important site down in southeastern Colorado, but it didn't recognize that it was often associated with the men that were on the site, including Kit Carson and others. But it was the women that ran the site, and it was often indigenous people, and this was actually part of Mexico at the time, and it was actually the Mexican women that were their wives who allowed them to settle the land. So this is an important story that was not told in the original nomination that was amended to tell the fuller story. Plaza Urusha is in Grand Junction. And this is a great story about, this is a handball court, which you would look at and say, a handball court? Oh, why is that important? But it's important because of the Basque community that migrated to Colorado, and they actually play with their hands. And I didn't include any pictures, but their hands are all like swollen, and it's wild. And so these are the type of stories that's really recognizing not only the ethnic history, but also the entertainment recreation that goes along with this community. That's really important. And then kind of thinking outside the box a little bit, not only is a handball court thinking outside the box, but we want you to also start thinking about different ways. So this is a mural, Sierras y Colores. I apologize, I do not speak Spanish, so I know I probably butchered that. But this is a very famous mural down in San Luis, in the San Luis Valley. The interesting thing about this is actually the mural itself is on the National Register now. We used a Criterion G argument for it, which allows us to go beyond the 50-year requirement, or go below the 50-year requirement. The building itself is not registered, though, so it's only the mural. And we work closely with National Park Service to do this. And so this is the sort of thing that we're starting to develop and starting to think outside the box of preservation, and NPS is welcoming that. And so there's a lot of great opportunities there. Now we get to Boulder County. Some of these are outside of Longmont, but I wanted to highlight kind of what's happening in your community. So this one was a National Register, the Rock Creek Farm. This one was listed and is part of Heritage for All because of its association with the indigenous community and the archaeology that's the potential to yield information about the indigenous community on the site. While it was listed for its house and other various purposes, it was recognized for that archaeological opportunity. The Boulder County Courthouse actually has been listed twice now. Actually 3 times, because it's part of a district. Then it was amended to include the story of in 1976 when 6 marriage licenses were issued to same-sex couples. And so it was recognized for that and its significant importance in LGBTQ history. And then because of its association with that same legal argument that they used at the time, and this was the most marriage licenses ever issued, that argument was later used by the Supreme Court to legalize same-sex marriage across the country. This has now become a National Historic Landmark associated with this. This was one that I wrote that I'm very proud of. This is in Boulder. This is the Q Dojo, I apologize. This is in just a backyard. Nobody would know it, but if you're driving into Boulder, look for it. Like there's just like a plain 1970s house with this in the backyard. The house was bought by the bow maker for the Emperor of Japan, who was the 20th bow maker in this lineage, and was starting to get dismayed that archery was turning into a sport rather than a meditative practice associated with Zen Buddhism. So he moved to Boulder and created this institute to keep that tradition alive. He passed about 10 years ago, but it still remains, and it's still used every Tuesday and Saturday for this purpose. Now we enter Longmont. This is the Tower of Compassion. This one is in process. Obviously, you all know this one very well because you've just made this a local landmark, but we're very excited that this is now moving forward as a national landmark as well on the National Register of Historic Places. This one will be before the January meeting, so you all will get notified, and Jennifer will be notified about the upcoming meeting for that. I believe the form has already been sent to you. Is that correct?
I want to say it has.
Yes, I think it should have been. So you will be commenting on it and provide any feedback to us. But I worked on this one with Carl McWilliams. Already, I got his permission. He's on our review board and said, yes, you can take my stuff. So we're both co-authors on it. So there shouldn't be anything out of the blue or anything new that you'll see. This is really a celebration of Longmont, and this one was close to my heart because I love this park very much. Another one in Longmont that is going to be heard in January as well, that is a state register nomination. So you will not be reviewing this one because it doesn't fall into a CLG requirement as a state register. But this is the what was the Burlington schoolhouse and is now the Longmont Buddhist Temple. We reached out to them, and because we were looking at, there are 8 historic Buddhist temples around the state of Colorado, and Longmont is lucky to have one. And not only is Longmont lucky to have one, it's one of the few that's actually still practicing. So we reached out to them, and they were excited to start having the conversation. Similar to how the Tower of Compassion, you all did it first, and then we took it. We're happy to go the other direction and work with you down. So that's always an opportunity of, if you're interested in talking to them about local landmark status, we'd be happy to start having those conversations. We brought it up to them. They seemed open to the idea. So and I know Jennifer and I have been having that conversation as well. Just a couple others in Boulder that are in process. The historic Second Baptist Church, which is the northernmost black church in Colorado. This is the historic one. It became a school for a long time. It's now condos. So this will be state, unfortunately, because of the configuration has changed on the interior, so it doesn't qualify for the National Register. And then temporary building number 1 on the CU Boulder campus is recognizing the Chicano students movement when they took over the building, and the associated bombings that occurred after that. But I don't want to take too much of your time, but I just wanted to provide some reminders of how the National Register and the State Register work. You know all of these very well, but it's always good to remind myself sometimes of that stuff. And if you ever have any questions or have questions about the Heritage for All or the 150, 250 work that we're doing, or just National and State Register processes in general, I'm happy to work with you. I'm a proud Longmonter, so I'm always excited to come up here and help out in preserving my community. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, and we really appreciate you coming up here and giving us all this information. Do any commissioners have a question or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Hold on. Commissioner
I have
Fenster.
a couple of questions. I don't know whether this is within your provenance, but what is done within the state and within this county about road signs and markers?
Yeah, so the roadside marker, there's 2 different programs. There's recognizing the ones that are already established, and then there are ones that are trying to do new ones for the 150, 250 initiative. So that one is being developed. The ones that are already there is a collaboration between History Colorado, CDOT, and then the communities that they're in. It's kind of complicated. I'm not the right person, but I know a little bit of it. Part of the problem is some of them have deteriorated over time, and then some of them have also have language that we would not use today that needs to be changed. And so that's a collaborative effort that's under review by History Colorado and CDOT as they start to explore those.
Well, now, I'm originally from Litchfield County in Connecticut, where we have a long history of road signage and markers. And the way that has been supported for maybe almost 100 years is by sponsorship. And have you all considered finding either individual or institutional sponsorship for the creation of those kinds of signs?
I know it's been discussed. I think part of, similar to the adding 150 sites to the National Register, we're not stopping at 150. We're hoping people this creates opportunities for people who have often been ignored by preservation to come forward. Similarly, the roadside markers. So they're adding 150, but they're not going to stop at 150. And I think they're thinking, okay, how do we continue it because of funding purposes? And I think they're thinking of sponsorships as a part of that.
Well, should we, meaning the commission, be a source for soliciting sponsorship? Should it be a project that the commission undertakes? Would it be a good, in other words, would it be a good premise or base for seeking that kind of sponsorship?
Potentially, I'd be happy to have that conversation with Jennifer and start to kind of develop that based on what History Colorado is doing in the next couple of years. And I'd be happy once they solidify what that role looks like, and the person that's going to be reviewing them, put you all into contact and have them come up here and talk to you as well. Because I believe they're going to be hiring someone for that position, is last that I heard, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. Now, the second point I wanted to make is that if you need assistance in Washington, I'm still connected with my law firm, Covington and Burling, and I know that we would be pleased to provide whatever local assistance in Washington you might need. If you would let me know when those needs occur.
Yes, that I really appreciate that, and we'll definitely let you know.
We're right in downtown and have good connections.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Jacoby?
Yes, thank you. I think you mentioned with the Baptist Church that it was up for a state designation, but it wouldn't qualify for local designation because it's been modified. Is the criteria different for state designation? What should we know about the state criteria?
So the it's not up for national register because of the criteria. Local, we've talked to them, and they're because of the ordinances, the property owner is not interested in the local designation, but they're interested in state because there are no property restrictions or restrictions to the property owner. And there is also beyond that, though, there are some different requirements. Oftentimes local ordinances require more than one criterion to be filled out. The state and national only require one. And then in addition to that, where you don't have any restrictions, so that's often appealing. And third is the age requirement. So national register is 50 years, state register is only 30 years, which has been very helpful because as we go through this, there are some sites that don't meet the 50-year requirement, but that are culturally really significant, and oftentimes those sites can be removed. I can tell you, as a member of the LGBT community, I've been to the 3 gay bars that me and my husband first went to for our first 3 dates are all gone. And so this stuff changes really quickly. And so being able to capture that history and not have to wait 50 years to do it can sometimes be very helpful.
Okay, yeah, the reason I was asking, about a year ago, we preserved a barn from Mary Allen. And at the time, with the home and with the whole site, it was even for consideration for a national designation. A lot of the site has been changed. Now we're going to have a 7-Eleven and a taco bar or something there, but we still have the barn. Mary Allen was a female homesteader at the time of Elizabeth Stanton and others. It's pretty rare for women to homestead alone, on their own, I believe, and maybe that would be worth consideration as a site for pioneer women in Colorado. So that's just a thought. I don't know if it would qualify or not, but just throw it out there.
I was going to say, I can speak to that a little bit, actually. I've been having discussions with other folks in the city as far as moving forward with having that property landmarked so that we can get some of the CLG grants and State Historic Fund grants for the historic preservation, for the preservation work that's needed on that barn. And then I would also be coordinating with Damien to see about getting it on the state register as well, because it is even though the site has been modified, the barn is still in its original location, and there is some open space around it. And it has, I would say, some, as you mentioned, some pretty interesting significance given a female homesteader, which was pretty
Right.
few, they were pretty few and far between. But that is something on my 2025 work program.
The other spot that immediately came on my radar was the gas station. It was something Corners. What is it?
Johnson Station?
Johnson's
Johnson's
Corners, which was one of the few spots people of color could come in Longmont, and that's been moved and it's been modified significantly. I don't know if that would qualify, but that's something maybe we should put on our radar.
That was, I will notify that, or say that with the Green Book project, they only came up with 25 sites and that one wasn't on it, but they did a larger survey and found that Colorado had about 260-ish sites named in the Green Book, and we were actually shocked that 165 were still standing, which is actually quite large, and that was one of them. It wasn't included on the final 25 list because of it being moved and because when they were doing it, it was still under its restoration, but certainly it probably wouldn't qualify for National Register, but it's certainly worth having a conversation for the State Register because it is also just a very cool building.
Yeah, and I will say that the State Historical Fund, just to add, the State Historical Fund over the years, and I think it's been a few years, I think it was before both of our time, was very involved with that building, and I think they still hold a covenant on it, and so I think History Colorado has been interested in making sure that's preserved. This is the first I'm hearing of the African American aspect of it, though, so it would be interesting for us to look at.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the SHF connection.
Yeah, no, that's important. And I don't know if you've all worked with Tom and Lori Simmons with Front Range Associates before, but they're the ones that did the African American project. So I'd be happy to talk more with them to find out what they were able to find out about the African American history associated with that.
And this leads into my question a little bit. Outside of random encounters like this one, how are you learning about all of these sites across the state, right? I mean, because some of them are maybe more obvious, but then there's probably lots of little nuggets and haystacks that are not as easy to find. So, is it just a grassroots thing? What are you using?
It's kind of a mixture. So some of it's grassroots, some of it is celebrating the sites that we've already done. Like we just listed. Another one that I wrote that I'm very proud of is the Denver Fire Station number 3 in Denver, and it got a lot of press coverage. And we've been really trying to say this is part of this program, so people reach out to us. Another one is our CLG coordinator, Lindsay Flewelling, has been really coordinating with the CLGs, and we've been having meetings with all the CLG coordinators to find out what sites at the local level, but also what opportunities are there at the local level with community engagement. Jennifer and I know have talked about when we start the Gill Foundation LGBT work, where we've been talking about coordinating with the Gay Straight Alliance at various high schools to help bring an interest of the younger generation in historic preservation. They may not have ideas of sites, but but their teachers or their advisors may, and even them talking to in the community and seeing and having pride in their community will help that development. And some of it is just reaching out to the various communities. So for the Brighton Buddhist Church, I just reached out to the Brighton Japanese American Association and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about different sites. In that meeting, I got about 5 different sites from that conversation, including the one that we were sitting in that I already knew about, but I didn't know about the 4 others. So it's really about kind of that grassroots, and also us getting out in the community and finding out what's important to them. Because we may say, oh, this one's really important, and we find out that it's not. That we don't go there, we go to this place. And some have been even just like a burger shop along the main street that the Chicano community stops at when they're doing their lowrider events. And they stop at this burger chain place. And even though for most of us, we'd be like, are we really going to do that burger stop? But when you learn the deeper history, you're like, oh, this is actually significant, and this has been going on for over 50 years. This is worth capturing. So I don't know if that fully answered your question.
Sure, no, absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And certainly if you have any ideas too, we're always open. And we do have a website that people can submit ideas. And so if you just Google Colorado Heritage for All, you can see that submission site.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No? Well, we very much appreciate you coming up here and kind of giving this presentation and just being part of that outreach and excitement for the kind of celebration to come.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay. Next on our list of business items would be the another review of the historic survey plan.
Perfect. Yep. Always do. There we go. Awesome. Thank you, Chairman Lane, commission members, and of course, Mayor, for your time this evening. So appreciate the opportunity to bring this kind of revised final draft back to you all to look at one more time as we finalize the little details. And I'm glad it worked out with my schedule. I was in town this time. So great to be here. And what I want to do, I know you all have seen this a couple different times and some of the modifications that were made this time around to fine tune a few of the details. So I want to kind of skim through some of the content, and I know more of the emphasis is a little bit more on the action plan and some of the strategies and discussion around that, if that works for the commission. So with that, I may scroll. I'll kind of scroll fast so no one gets seasick or anything like that. But of course, I want to thank our team that was a part of this with Tim Stroh of Springboard Studios and our team at Ayers. So what we did is we really broke down this strategy plan into kind of the working from the top down, the high level view and perspective, starting here with the commission engagement that we did a few months back, where you all helped identify sites and locations. We pulled out the maps and did a fun exercise, so appreciate all your insights during that. That was a lot of fun, and it was great to see kind of where your interests aligned and some of your focus areas and how we could make that stitch in with this overall strategy. So those are highlighted kind of at the beginning of the strategy plan. Of course, talking about the context of the community and brief history. We could spend a lot of time talking about history, but really want to just hit some of those highlight nuggets about development and what some of those triggers were of development over time up to where we are today. And then really highlighting where things are today and moving forward. Those various development pressures, as well as wildfire and flood mitigation hazard areas. So we start with urban development, talk a little bit about the development pressures and redevelopment pressures. And it's very apparent as I drove into town again today and seeing some more of those pressures popping up in some of the neighborhoods we've even discussed and highlighted here. So I think it really emphasizes kind of the need to do some of the reconnaissance and more detailed survey and historical findings on some of those properties. And then as we talk about the environmental risks, I don't think any of us ever hope to see another Marshall Fire of 2021. It's a blessing that this area has a lot of great open space around us. Unfortunately, as it continues to stay dry and more people recreate and use those areas, there's more risk. You can't fix everyone's habits and personality traits and things that happen, and technology and all that fun stuff, utilities. So being aware of that, being cognizant of that, and how that can impact our historical assets and our unique historical resources in and around communities, especially if they haven't been documented before something could happen to them. And then highlighting the flood risk. And of course, the city has done a lot of great efforts. I guess it would be 11 years now, really working to help mitigate flood concerns and hazards. And you see some of those through some of the neighborhoods we talk about, including the Cannery East neighborhood that we highlight, with the big drainage swale through the middle. But hopefully a lot of those mitigation measures have helped reduce some of the risks moving forward. Excuse me. for the general public, this isn't anything I don't think any of you need to be told, but of course the importance of historic preservation. Wanted to just highlight in kind of a fun way some of those benefits from a community building aspect, placemaking aspect, and also the environmental and economic benefits. And this is information that, as part of the educational efforts and outreach, you can pull some of this information out, be able to utilize that as part of your resources when you're going out having your conversations. If you're meeting with the youth at the schools, a lot of times the graphics and call outs and stuff like that are really good to be able to reference. Excuse me. The next thing we did is just take a look at the existing surveys and research. And so Jennifer did a great job of providing that information and what was available, because I think around that same time is when a lot of the accessibility requirements came into play. So information was pulled from websites, and so we had to do a lot of kind of back and forth to be able to pull some resources and information based on what were in the files and then also what was available online. So wanted to just document and capture the information that has been done thus far between surveying. Oh, thank you very much. It's like if I open my water bottle, it squeaks a bunch, so I didn't want to do that. So really wanted to just highlight those in kind of the middle part of the survey here before we get into the details of the plan, some of those recommendations of the existing neighborhoods. So you can see what's been done just as a refresher. I really like this picture of the building. It's just a great historical picture before we dive right into the East Side Historic District and talking about that neighborhood, what kind of pressures it's facing, and the opportunities with that as well. We do capture and highlight that later on in the action matrix. The same with the West Side Historic District. I feel like the West Side's seeing opportunities, and it has some of those pressures. There's a little bit more protections for some of these neighborhoods than are the ones that we really get into with our focus. And lastly, the Downtown Historic District. Of course, right here across the street, we have the hotel popping up. So there's always going to be that opportunity and those pressures that come up, but there's a lot of great resources that exist today that we want to continue to preserve and be mindful of moving forward. So diving into the areas of interest, and we'll jump down. So a handful of the neighborhoods, the Bond Farm neighborhood, here kind of near the core area of the community. And then what we've done is we've kind of captured, the time period for that neighborhood, some of those physical characteristics, and we spent a whole day, Tim Stroh and I spent a whole day driving around the entire city. I saw neighborhoods I've never seen before in Longmont, so it was really fun. And some of the guidance that you all said, hey, go to this area, go see this neighborhood, I probably would never have gone to. So really enjoyed that, being able to see some of these unique homes, but also then seeing kind of some of those pressures that they're facing with additions, modifications, things like that really start to take them out of character for that neighborhood and really are starting to make an impact. So a lot of the characteristic elements here, as you can tell, some very architectural elements. So that's Tim. I'll lean on Tim for some of the good details that he's provided in his observations. And then started to highlight the recommendations there in terms of whether this should be something that's looked at from guidelines, code updates, maybe an overlay opportunity, whether it should be surveyed at reconnaissance level, a little bit more detailed historical survey. So we want to capture those different things as we went through this and highlight some of the images of some of the homes that we found kind of fun and unique as we went through. I don't think the report could have been twice or four times as long with all the pictures we took. There are some really great homes and great neighborhoods, and the community's doing a great job. I mean, a lot of private homeowners are doing a great job of embracing that and taking care of their homes, which is really cool to see too. The Brown's Old Apple Farm, so that neighborhood, kind of similar to Bond neighborhood, similar kind of characteristics, a little bit less from this neighborhood perspective in terms of immediate impacts, immediate pressures that we saw outside of just some of the additions, some of the other modifications that you tend to see throughout the community as people buy older homes, fix them up, or grow within their homes and just want to stay there, so they start to add on and can impact the home and the character of the architecture. The Cannery East neighborhood, so this is out east. This is probably one of my favorite neighborhoods, and you can tell it was one of our higher priority ones that we listed. And driving in, you could see the townhome development right off of 3rd, right there on the corner. While the townhomes look great, they're a great addition to the community for housing, everything like that. You can tell the impacts when you just look at it next to the homes right around it, and just how it feels kind of out of place and out of context with that neighborhood. And we see that Cannery East neighborhood definitely is one that's probably going to be facing more of those pressures. Now that there's one project in, there's likely to have more that just kind of start trickling behind it. So a really unique neighborhood from the size of the homes, the eclectic mix within this neighborhood as well, both on the east side of the drainage swale and also on the west side. So there's a lot of mix there. It's really unique homes, unique character. You do get lost. If you've ever been in there and you try to go down different roads, you end up popping back out the way you came. So we found that out, a few different ways the hard way, but yeah, it's a great neighborhood, and I think it has a lot of potential and is probably one of the ones that's facing some of the more immediate pressures for development and redevelopment. So captured a few of the characteristics here. You can see townhome development under construction when we snap this. And then there's the existing apartment complex that's kind of right on the fringes within the neighborhood. Going up to Hilltop Village, another neighborhood, just kind of a good mix, eclectic mix of housing. This is another one that maybe doesn't have as much immediate pressure for development, just based on its proximity from the core, also just the era of the homes, and they're usually a little bit more affordable homes, but don't have that same pressure that you have, again, near the core along major corridors. So this was one neighborhood that, over time, it'll probably start to see those growth pressures, but not immediate. We didn't see it as kind of that next 5-10 year horizon like some of the others, like Cannery East. I'm going to say Kitely. I'm hoping I'm saying that right, but if not, I apologize and please correct me. But another great neighborhood. Both Kitely started to have some unique home design in here. We actually started to see a little bit of the Southmore neighborhood influence up here, which was kind of interesting. If you look at, and it's very sporadic, there's a home here or there that all of a sudden you'll see one of those gabled ends or the roof pitch that goes out and kind of flares up. And it was just unique to see that there was some of that relationship between neighborhoods on kind of the opposite ends of the community and the core. So a unique community, a unique neighborhood that I think over time will probably be one of those next ones in the 10-15 year to start seeing some of those pressures, as these homes are smaller, usually a little bit more affordable. So you're going to see people buy them up and then want to kind of grow into their houses as well. So some guidelines might be great to have in place, and just some general protections to kind of keep that massing and form in place. The Longmont Estates, so kind of going way up northwest, an interesting kind of community where you got the strip that kind of goes up northwest, and then it's just kind of a mix as you go around it. This was another one that no immediate pressure, given that a lot of the homes are kind of in that 70s era, and the homes are usually a little bit bigger at that point. I know we have a 78 home in Greeley, and we've done a lot of interior remodeling, not a lot to the outside, because you don't want to touch the outside too much on those homes, because then you'll just open the can of worms. So these homes usually, again, are bigger, accommodate the growing family a little bit more, and so this one probably in the future might see some pressures as people try to renovate, upgrade some of these homes. And that could be either just on the street frontage side, or maybe the back side of the home is allowed to be a little bit more creative with adjustments, things like that, just to kind of keep that character as you drive through the neighborhood. The Lou Miller area, probably one of the more fun neighborhoods just to kind of experience as you drive through it, because there are the three distinct areas, the traditional Lou Miller area to the far east, from a little bit earlier in the 1900s, and then you hit the transitional area here in the middle, closer to the medical facilities. And there was even, I think, one of the medical buildings or one of the office buildings had a little tilt on its axis as well, which was kind of interesting to see. And then as you hit the Lou Miller West area, The homes are, another decade or two newer, but a little bit more eclectic mix in the west versus the traditional Lou Miller, where you got more of the ranch style homes that really have some good character and good bones. And so as part of the recommendation there, doing reconnaissance survey, of course you have the three distinct areas. I could see that traditional, the more eastern side of Lou Miller being one that you start to put some protections in early on, just so again, experience the pop tops, the additions, which it'll be interesting to see how everyone does that with the tilted access and setbacks, trying to meet all those requirements. But a really neat neighborhood, and has a lot of potential. And just driving through some of the streets, some of the homes have some renovations occurring, and so it's just, are they doing it in a way that kind of still preserves that character and that feel for that neighborhood? I think the last thing you'd want to see is, additions that start to, change the orientation of the homes or really modify that, especially on those more ranch style homes. What do we got there? Well, that's weird.
That is weird.
Huh. That's funny. Those pages are there, let me tell you. Could we close it and reopen it? Is it accessible, or did I just mess it up?
Let me see, I can find here.
Okay. Thought maybe it needs to be reopened.
It could just be this file was being weird too.
That can be the case.
Let's see. Don't. Okay.
I never understand that.
Don't quite know what's going on there.
Oh, there we go.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And we're back.
It just got tired of waiting so long. That was probably the case. So, so of course you can see the homes here, the one on the north, or on the top of the screen, being a little bit more of that ranch style in the eastern side. And then this home here in a little bit more of that western, Lou Miller West area. So larger homes, usually 2 stories, split levels, a mix. As we get into Old North, again, another important neighborhood that's near the core area. Some of the impacts here aren't being seen as much as they are in some of the other areas from what we were seeing, but this definitely has some significant features and some unique features, and this could be one that starts to feel that pressure over the next few years. But starting with some guidelines, understanding what that looks like and those potentials for community education, awareness of the historical resources and what's unique about that neighborhood, by diving in a little bit more from a historical standpoint and historical context. The original town site, that one's just kind of a quick one-pager, since it's important, it's relevant, but it wasn't something we were diving into as part of our survey strategy plan. And then hitting the Southmore neighborhoods. So, we already talked about the Tower of Compassion early on, but, you really see it as you start to go into the neighborhood with the commercial building right here on the northern side of Jersey, I believe. Yes. And so this is a neighborhood that has a lot of unique features throughout. I wouldn't say every home, every block has those unique historical elements, but there are homes sprinkled throughout there that have some really cool character. And you miss them if you drive by too fast, but you get kind of under the windows some of those planter architectural features. I mentioned earlier those roofs that at the ends they kind of flare up, really unique to see, and kind of some neat elements how that then kind of relates back to the commercial buildings and some of the commercial architecture that's there as well. So this is a neighborhood that we definitely highlighted the need to do a little bit more deeper survey work into, looking at. This was, I think, one of the top probably 2-3 priority areas that we had flagged when we were going through it and really identifying, because while there's not a lot of redevelopment pressure happening on that side of the highway, it'll get there. And, you want to, of course, always be on top of it and ahead of it. And I think with the awareness of the Tower of Compassion, everyone using the park, their neighborhood's starting to be, seen and identified more. You got some new development pockets nearby and around it. So it's a good time to really get in there and just see what is there before some of those architectural elements are removed, and then you kind of lose those unique, distinct features. and then jumping into the action matrix. So happy to answer questions, highlight anything that you saw as you're going through it. I think every time I open this thing, I probably always see something I'm like, I could do that a little different, or we could change this a little bit, which is the case with any report as you work through it. So appreciate your time and happy to talk through next steps.
Okay, thanks for running through that. Commissioners with questions? Commissioner Jacoby.
Well, yeah, I'm not, well, as far as, let me first say, that I have a couple of comments about corrections.
Okay.
I can go down the list. Page 6, it says the granary is under construction, but part of it's, the picture you have is planned, but it's not even started construction there. That's a small point, but that's one point that you might just change the wording. On page 8, the old St. Stephen's Church is on Main Street, not Bross Street. The confusing thing is there's two St. Stephen's churches in Longmont. The new one that is functional is on Bross Street, and the one on Main is the old St. Stephen's. And it says that this was built, before anything else was there. Well, if it was built in 1881, like it says, the town was around for 10 years already, so that line would have to come out of there.
Okay.
On page 17, it's a small point. You describe a building as a bank. It's actually now a residence on the west side there.
Yes.
That's actually the oldest house in Longmont, I believe. It's built in 1871, was on Main Street as a bank. They picked it up, moved it, plopped it down there, but now it's a residence.
Okay.
So it's a little confusing just reading that's saying it's a bank. Let's see. Other things on page 11. I'm not sure if this is a mistake or not. It describes Bond Farm as Tatanka site. Is that a Tanaka site? I don't know. But I just thought that was let's see if I can.
This is Tatanka.
Tatanka,
I believe
yeah.
that was the firm that did the survey.
It is Tatanka Farm, not Tanaka Farm. There's
No. This was the Tatanka was the firm.
Okay,
That
good.
was the person who did the
Good,
survey.
so it's good. I just wanted to double check on that.
Yeah.
On page 13, you say the historic districts were formed in 1987, but then on page 14, you say the East Side Historic District was made in 1986. So one of the dates is wrong. I don't know which one, but I saw that. Let's see, other things. Going down to page 38. I read through the whole thing with a fine-tooth comb, which
You need to, yeah.
It's a lot of work. I realize. So I'm not trying to be critical, but I caught a few little things.
No,
So
you're the local expert.
so the neighborhood description on page 38 is confusing Southmore Park with Lou Miller. It talks about the streets that it borders, but this is for Lou Miller, and it starts talking about Missouri Avenue, Jersey Avenue, and Pike Road. That's the Southmore Park. That's not Lou Miller. So somehow, halfway in that first
I see it.
double caret after neighborhood. So the description of the boundaries is wrong. And then, let's see. Oh, and that came up again on page 44. In the description of another neighborhood, I forget which one it was, but on page 44, it describes East 3rd Avenue as being a major arterial and gateway to the core downtown, but this isn't a core downtown neighborhood. I don't know what that line is in there. That's at the second column, just before recommendations, that last double caret. That's for some other neighborhood, I think. And then I had some questions about the action matrix. Just as far as report priority, I think that's really important for us as far as prioritizing. And, I saw under natural disaster risk, Hilltop Village is at risk for flooding. I don't know, with a name like Hilltop Village, it surprised me, but maybe that's what it is that's what I thought, right? But maybe because there is a canal that runs behind there, it is high flooding risk. That's fine. But my concern was with Old North neighborhood. I went around and looked at all these neighborhoods, and I consider that a high risk for redevelopment. The reason being, it is near the core downtown, and there are, I was shocked when I actually went through there, how many homes, I would call them colony cabins. They're about 25 feet by 12 feet. They're very tentative, early buildings that have additions and additions and additions, and some of them are kind of run down. I think those historically might be very significant. I don't know the history of them, but they might be significant. And yet, because of the buildings themselves, they're at very high risk of being scraped and replaced. So I would think that neighborhood would be a high priority because of the proximity to downtown and a lot of the older buildings. But that's just my thought. I don't know how.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do, and I appreciate that, if we can just split it up for the sake of the cleanliness of the discussion, let's hold the rest of the conversation on the action matrix off for just a moment.
Okay.
And anybody who's got any other comments or questions on the report, let's get those out of the way. And then we can swing back around and have a
Okay.
discussion about the action matrix, because that's, I think, our feedback on the report is like job one, and then the big job is what's the action
Right,
matrix,
right.
and I'd like to split those up.
Okay. Well, that's all I could find, and I went through it really carefully, so thank you.
Appreciate it, yeah. It's always hard, sometimes you copy and paste some of those bullets, and I think that's where it came from, so appreciate it.
Great. Let's see. I've got Commissioner Sibley up next.
Okay. So I found something you didn't mention. On page 21, and I'll give this to you actually.
Okay.
Part of your map is hiding.
Yep.
One of your little neighborhoods. Did you see that?
I saw that just a little bit ago, yep. I was like, wait, where's the other neighborhood? It's right there behind the red box,
Yeah, so that was one thing. And then actually, the other items, I had two questions, but they were on the matrix, so I can wait.
Okay.
But I'm sure you also saw that there's a typo in Longmont on the matrix.
On the matrix, I didn't see
Yeah.
that.
So- You'll see that, so anyways. So that was it, and I do have a question about the matrix, but I'll wait till we get to that stuff, so that's it.
Okay.
Thank
Any
you.
other report-related comments? No. I've got a couple, but you tagged one of them, so thank you. On the maps, it occurred to me. So we've got the. I think there's maybe not a consistency with a couple of early ones, and I'd have to go back and look again. I think we had the surveyed properties showing up on one of the maps, but not on another. And a couple of those. So I think you've got in this boundary map of east side, I think you've got all the surveyed properties, but
Yep.
maybe you didn't do that on the west side. Yeah, right here. I think your surveyed properties in this map is missing, right? And then with regard to the map, the other thing that occurred to me is that we don't have, unless I missed it, we don't have the actual landmarks called out on any of these maps, right? Our local landmarks, and that seems like an important thing to have included, with a separate shaped star, or however you want to do it. But
I think it's busy, yeah.
it's a lot of information, and maybe you don't need to do it on the boundary piece, but I think y'all probably somehow we've got it. We should have that, right?
Okay.
We should have that context of what properties are actually landmarked.
Yep.
in
And I
there.
think you guys have that data, is that correct?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I think
you
we
should-
have
I
that
don't
later.
think it's a complicated.
Yeah.
Just a graphic.
I think you did, yeah.
And then we kind of mentioned this in last month's hearing, and so I just want to make sure this actually does happen. Especially like that overall map, and some of it might just be the resolution necessary to make this file size manageable. But if you zoom in on this, you can't read anything, right? And so we've got to fix that somehow. And what we suggested last time was an appendix with better, larger scale maps.
Oh,
We
okay.
do that with some of the master plans, so this can be a reference, but
Yeah, so the higher resolution map is very clear. The reduced for the packets, that's why it's pixelating.
Yeah, this
a
is,
lot,
Right.
this is a
unfortunately.
lower, yeah, I have a higher resolution one that would be kind of the final, but for emailing purposes, this was,
yeah. So, I mean, when I was driving around, zooming in on my iPad with this and zooming in on my phone with another while I was driving around the neighborhood is probably really dangerous, but,
It gives you false hope too, because it starts to look clear and then it
right,
goes
and then
blurry.
you can't see anything, and you're like, where's this dividing line?
Yeah, so there is a high resolution one that is
yeah.
very clear, but I like your approach of taking that map, blowing it up, so you have that just as a separate exhibit. I think that's perfect. Plus, we have all the shapefile layers that will be part of your digital mapping, so you'll have that. So you kind of have these multiple interfaces. So I
Right.
think that's great.
Yeah, okay, great. And then I had a question about this. Obviously, there are some neighborhoods that have been, you've picked some neighborhoods for fairly obvious reasons. But in particular, the Longmont Estates one in particular, like, why that one and why that exact boundary, and why not other, if you're doing that one, why not others that are in the city? Like,
Great question.
how'd you get there?
Yes. So Longmont Estates was one that was a little bit more of an outlier. And that was one that we received some feedback from the commission for that neighborhood specifically. And so as we went through it, there were a few resources in there and some important things. That's why it's kind of a lower priority one in terms of the overall structure of all the neighborhoods. You could, pop in and look at little enclaves in a lot of different neighborhoods. In terms of the boundaries, it follows a lot of the platted boundary setup. Some of the other boundaries, they either follow existing boundaries that are established. I forget what it is, but there's a lot of signage that kind of characterizes a neighborhood. And when we drove around, we started to look at, okay, this really is where the transition is from this neighborhood to this neighborhood. So that's where some of the boundaries came from. But yeah, the Hilltop Village one, or the Estates one, that was one that was a little at the direction of the commission. We went out there, we looked at, we wanted to incorporate it since it was of interest from the commission itself.
Okay. Also, in our last meeting, we talked about having the museum and the historical society review this at all. That was in our minutes, so I don't know if that happened, and if it didn't, it would be worth doing before we're done.
I will definitely get this to them.
Okay.
I completely overlooked that this
Okay,
month.
all right. Okay, perfect, thank you. So, yeah, I think that, and the only other comment I'll make, and I don't know if this is nitpicking, but I was a little confused by the order of the areas, just why you chose to put certain neighborhoods in a particular order. Like, you just started reading some of the older neighborhoods, and then we have some of the newer neighborhoods, and then, well, here's Old North, and it just seemed like an odd.
An area of interest,
Yeah,
it's just
what-
alphabetical.
Okay,
That for ease of reading and alphabetical, that was the reason it went
Okay.
in that way.
okay, yeah, all right. Well, I guess that makes sense, but it just threw me.
Yeah, and we could put a note or something that in the introduction of that, like these are in like
But
in no particular order, just alphabetical.
That might be worth it.
Sometimes that's
for-
good to, because otherwise, yeah, if someone looks at it and they don't have a clue, they're gonna be like, so is this one more important? Is this one less important?
Right,
So,
right.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. All right. Any other report related, not matrix related? Yes, okay. Commissioner Fenster.
What is going to be the ultimate purpose of the document? Is this a study document for schools and public officers? Is it also a walk-around document where it will be picked up and used when someone walks around the city? And if it's the latter, and I assume to some extent it is because I'm already using it for that purpose, is there something more that the document needs to make it utilitarian for people who are walking around with it?
Great question, Jennifer.
So I think we may have discussed this at the last meeting. This is basically it's a policy guiding document for this commission and for staff as we move forward with with doing future survey plans. We're trying to prioritize or doing future surveys, doing future cultural resource surveys. This is to identify areas that we as the commission think are important and that need to be prioritized for reconnaissance and cataloging and surveying to make sure that we have documentation of any resources and history of the city. It's less of a public walking tour document. It could certainly serve that function. I mean, it will be publicly available, but ultimately the purpose is to guide future planning and survey efforts.
Not quite for me. Is there a version, a condensed version, or is there an instructional appendix that is intended so that it can be used, or parts of it can be used for walk-around purposes?
So that wasn't part of our original
Yeah.
scope with this project. It was just to provide a strategy by assessing some neighborhoods, identifying some of those key features, trying to establish some sort of boundaries where we best could, and then guide prioritization of what neighborhoods or neighborhood areas maybe should be surveyed in what order based on level of priority.
Is there something else that is available that would serve a walk-around purpose? Or is there a condensed version of this document that's intended that would serve a walk-around purpose?
No, simply because that's not the purpose of this document. This is not intended to be, a marketing or a community tool. It's really a tool to guide our priorities moving forward as a city and as a commission for doing our documentation work and planning work. Some of the information in there could certainly be used by, neighborhood groups to develop their own walking tours and their own documents, but ultimately the scope of this was not to put together basically a publicity or a walking tour document. The scope of this was really for a guiding document for policy and planning purposes.
Right, and I might add that in part, this is happening because there isn't another document out there. Like, we had to start somewhere, right? We don't have this information. This is one of the very first steps we're taking. Now, if Commissioner Jacoby wants to write another walking tour of a different neighborhood, he could use this as his foundational document for his next book. But outside of that, this is That's really what this is about starting the process of looking outside the three districts that we have and beginning to gather some information so that we can move forward with a broader picture of surveys and then eventually a preservation plan for the whole city that would, there's just a lot of stuff to get to that point.
Are we missing something important if we don't do that, or at least get someone to sponsor, someone or some organization to sponsor a product out of this work that would give us walking tours? Mm-hmm. Whether we have to go out and get a commercial sponsor or somebody in the city or something like that, doing all this work, it seems to me that we have the genesis of a more hand-to-eye useful document. Why take a pass on doing it?
I don't know that anybody's taking a pass on it. It's just that it's not what the commission's intent in basically putting this scope out and getting this started. Now, if somebody else wants to take this, as a commission, I think what our goal is eventually to get properties documented, to get a plan out there for public comment, to have this process about preservation. If somebody else wants to take the information, it's public, and they want to, if Commissioner Jacoby is not interested in writing another book. Perhaps there is another Longmont citizen that is, and this is a perfect start, right? But we can't, the scope can't creep. It wouldn't even be creep, it would be
No, yeah,
mushroom cloud.
I don't disagree with that
Yeah.
because this obviously needs to be a much more comprehensive and, how shall I say, scientifically created piece of work. But while we're doing it, and before we put it down permanently, should we just on behalf of the public go out and solicit some walking tour useful products out of it? Why, even if we're going to go and get a commercial organization to do it, why put it away without having created walking products? That's my question.
Right. I don't know that we have a clear answer for you, but
If I may,
yeah,
Mr. Chair.
sure.
So when I served as a staff liaison up in Windsor, when I was a staff member in Windsor, we had something similar done years prior before I got there, and it had approximate boundaries. It had some designated or surveyed properties. And what we did is we worked with the state and some of the schools, and we just took it and said, okay, well, here's an approximate boundary. Let's make a digital walking tour or something. And it was like a Esri story map, which is a GIS interface on your phones. And you had the boundary, you just had some of the snippets from it, like this is what's important here. Here's some characteristics to look for at a high level that then led into other efforts. So it's something that you can always pursue as another step. Like this is one step forward, and then you can take additional steps and go in different directions, such as walking tours, the more detailed surveys or reconnaissance surveys for these different neighborhoods to get more information. So there's a lot of avenues the commission and staff in the city could take if you were interested in that, but that would be beyond kind of the confines of this strategy report.
Well,
perhaps
that's-
a conversation talking point for the retreat.
Good.
Okay.
I hate to see it put away without that having been considered, without doing that having been considered, because there is no substitute at this time.
Yes.
Okay.
And I hope you never put this way. I hope you use
Yeah,
it moving
yeah.
forward. Otherwise, I've failed. So
The intent, I think, from this commission is not to have this sit on a shelf and go no further. That's for sure. Let's see. Council Rep Mayor Peck. Oh, sorry. Oh,
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Finster, I'm happy that you brought that up, but I'm going to go to a different tact on it. I love this survey, and as I was reading through it at the recommendations, my question is for both the commissioners as well as for Planning Department. We are going to be doing our Envision Longmont update in 2026. And every year, whenever there's a development, as you know, Jennifer, the residents come out and say, this doesn't match anything that's here. We need to go through our design standards, and I don't know if the commissioners ever go to planning and advise perhaps that in this certain area, when we're doing design standards, or that we look at the historic preservation part of it, and the new building needs to conform, as you've said in this survey, for height, design, setbacks, everything that, just as recommendations, because when it does come back to council, we don't have anything to refer to. And now we do, but I would like to use this in updating our codes, because I totally agree with you that we need to have some design in some of our buildings as you drive around in the new stuff and you go, who thought of that? So that's just a comment and a question to see if that's something you want to discuss or decide upon. So thank you very much.
thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Jacoby.
Yeah, I have two separate things to point out. The first is just speaking from experience. I don't think this would make a good walking tour. If you attempted part of my book, which is just one neighborhood, you can see how long it takes. Walking would be very difficult for all of this. I actually bicycled around these various neighborhoods in preparation for this, and that took quite a while during one of our lovely warm, Indian summer days. But bicycling would even be difficult. What I could envision is maybe making this more inclusive with other neighborhoods. As Mayor Peck pointed out, all the neighborhoods, we have this development, that development, put them all in a pamphlet, and maybe Visit Longmont would want to work on this. And then they could just hand out a pamphlet at Visit Longmont. These are our neighborhoods in Longmont. But that could be something for them to do because that's really more in their line. And it would just be, it wouldn't go into great detail necessarily, but I don't know how much detail we would have to go into for individual homes with these things. But I could see Visit Longmont working on a pamphlet and being more inclusive with even more neighborhoods, but including this. So that's point one. Point two, or question two, I guess, is this is our starting document, and I'm just looking at this map while we're discussing this and saying, hey, there's a neighborhood we missed. How long are we going to be relying on this? How long have we thought about, are we modifying this? How modifiable will this be going forward? I'm thinking of the neighborhood between Sunset Golf Course and Hover Street, north of 3rd Avenue. There's a lot of custom homes in there, some very unique homes. The Emperor of Japan stayed in one because it's quite a nice place. It's a unique neighborhood, and we didn't survey that. So this is an ongoing process, obviously, but I just think we have to think also ahead. This is going to have to be modified. Anyway.
So if I may respond to that through the chair, this is a starting point. There's no reason it cannot be amended in the future. To Mayor Peck's point, Envision Longmont, we are looking at doing an update in 2026. The good news is that I'll be the project manager for that. At this point, I'll be the project manager for that. And one of the things my intent is to use this survey plan as well as a future historic preservation plan essentially as elements, especially a historic preservation plan would be an element of the Envision Longmont update. This survey plan would certainly be something that informs that planning process as well. So, from a staff perspective, my intent is that none of these exist in a vacuum, and they all inform our other planning processes and planning documents that we put together moving forward. So the other thing is, as far as architectural guidelines and design guidelines, the code currently does have some broad compatibility, very broad, but ultimately I would anticipate that a land development code update would come out as an implementation effort for once the Envision Longmont plan is completed. So previous planning, the Envision Longmont plan was created in 2018 or 2016 it was adopted. And then it basically a land development code update kind of rolled out of that. So the land development code update was, land development code was pretty significantly overhauled and adopted in 2018. I would expect a similar process to come out of that. There will be a huge amount of public engagement and public involvement as parts of those processes as well. But I will definitely continue to keep this commission informed as we move forward with that. But my expectation is that we would be engaging all of our advisory and recommending boards and commissions as part of that planning process.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Sibley.
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted to mention that there was really no way to capture any of the things along the north side of Main, or even just Main Street north and south, basically, of downtown. And I bring that up just because there's a handful of things like closer to 17, 15, further north, whatever, where there's signage, older buildings that kind of speak to tourism, like from the 50s and 60s, maybe up to the 70s. And some of that stuff could, I think, be very interesting. So I wanted to point that out. And I had another one and I've now lost it. Oh, I know. I wanted to mention that I think the museum also has a lot of walking tour stuff. And I thought that they even had an app or something, like where you could do, right? Rick, does that ring a bell?
We have an app for Main Street.
Okay. So anyway, so those were the two things that I had. But it really was that sort of Main Street, the northern part of Main Street was a thought for me, so.
Okay. Let's see, Commissioner Jacoby, and then if we can move on into the action matrix after this, that'd be great.
I actually found one other typo that you just brought up that you reminded me of. On page 18, it describes a picture as South Main Street. That's 4th and Main. On page 19, it has the exact same corner, and it calls it North Main and 4th Avenue. So they're both North Main. It's both the same corner, actually. Small
Okay.
point, but
But
there you go.
valid, thank you. Okay, so let's get into the survey recommendation action matrix. And maybe before, I have one comment, one question, and then I'll open it up. I had a question on the Bone Farm survey recommended note that said yes, limited or with browns. And I didn't really understand what that meant. Yeah, page 47.
Yeah. Let me skim back up to that analysis. Sorry, not trying to make anyone sick. I wish I had a good answer for you on that one, but I don't. I probably have to circle back with Tim on that one to see where
Okay.
what were you meaning by the yes
Right.
limited.
Yeah, okay.
It might be because in here it calls out more of the commercial areas around it, but I can check with him and
Okay.
I'll get an email to Jennifer that she can shoot over
Okay.
to you all.
All right. Perfect. And then my other comment was, so we've got all the neighborhoods in here, and that's great. But one thing that we started talking about, even in that initial kind of session, that isn't really on here, and I think it should just be added as an action matrix. Well, this is my opinion, and I'm happy to take obviously the rest of the commission's feedback on this, but we don't have a placeholder for these outlying agricultural surveys. And if this is a document that's going to be the foundation for where, what surveys we go try and get funded and executed, it's not in here anywhere. So we didn't ask you to run around town and figure out where all the various agricultural buildings are, but I think we ought to have a placeholder in this matrix for outlying agricultural, properties, and that can be its own survey goal. That's my opinion.
Yeah,
Anyway.
happy to expand the matrix to create some of those fields because I think it also can capture, the potential commercial areas along the main core and as well as kind of around the golf course area and some of those custom home
Yeah,
neighborhoods.
if we want to call it an outlying properties survey or whatever we want to do, I mean, there's a
Yeah.
couple of different ways to tackle
Yeah, we
that, but
can list some different ones and kind of run past
Yeah.
Jennifer. But yeah, I think having some of those additional fields, plus I think having a few blanks so that way it can be an actual matrix that you
and
all
that-
can fill out
yeah,
and work
that-
through
right, that's
as things
fair.
change.
Okay, so just in the end, what I'd like to, before we're done here, I'd like to have some kind of consensus, if we can get there, from the commission about what we think the maybe top 5 priorities are in this matrix. But at this point, I'll just open it up for anybody who's got a comment or question on the matrix. Okay, perfect. Let me get my, okay, Commissioner Tarek.
Okay, this is just a clarification question on the matrix. So where on the second page of the matrix, it says, commercial properties within these areas. What, I was a little confused what these areas were, was it the areas below, like the west, east, and downtown historic districts, or is it all of them? I was confused by that.
Yep. I was reading that before. Well, you guys were talking about the state stuff, and I want to clarify that because I believe what that's intended to be are the commercial areas that are on kind of the fringes of a lot of these neighborhoods that we talked about. So around like the Southmore neighborhood, there's some commercial properties around there, and what we did is when we sent this over to a couple firms that do survey work holistically is kind of their big focus. They looked at and they're like, there's these few properties kind of around the outliers that you talk about and that you show. Let's, there's roughly this many, let's put it in there, and it would be about this much to just capture those commercial ones since they're a little bit more specific in how they're surveyed. So I'll work on the wording of that neighborhood place.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, other comments or questions on the matrix? And if not, then I'd be interested in feedback on priorities. Okay. Commissioner Norton?
Yeah, I think my question would be, does the planning department have an idea or anticipate the cadence at which surveys could occur? Like, are we thinking one a year, a couple a year, one every other year?
I think it's a big giant, it depends. We'll have to look at funding availability, what grants we can get to fund the work as well. I think one a year is probably not unreasonable, although some of the larger areas may take a little bit more. It depends on, it basically comes down to money. So we'll hopefully get to them as quickly as we can, so.
I have an additional question about survey and kind of like how we're thinking. This is a wonderful planning document, very, very focused on architecture. Only one of the neighborhoods really talks about any sort of cultural history or importance. When we're thinking about surveys, are we really only thinking about architectural surveys, or are we going to do a broader survey of all the significance criteria for these, well, at least three of the significance criteria for these neighborhoods?
I would anticipate the surveys would take a broader approach. The architecture gives us a starting point.
Thank you.
That's a great point. Let's see, Commissioner Sibley.
Yeah, I had a question because as I was trying to figure out my priorities on those, on the second page where you've got West Side NR District, East Side, were those in some places? Some of the dates mentioned are referring to the last time they were surveyed, and I just wasn't sure as I was reading that. Like, I'm assuming that there is a survey because they're updating NR's nominations. So I was a little confused on like, what does that mean? Like how do I consider that as far as prioritizing?
I have the same question.
Okay, thank you.
Confusion about that.
So yeah, because they didn't want to dismiss those, but on the flip side, if they've already been surveyed, maybe it's time to look at some other places first and then go back to them. So.
Yep. And I can't fully answer the question, but with those two areas, I think because they were surveyed a little while back, that there's been a lot that's occurred, and so resurveying is important, and they face a lot of the redevelopment pressures that are currently occurring.
Okay.
So that's why they probably showed up on a higher level, because a lot of times, since they've already been a designated district, the survey aspect might be a little bit quicker through that process, but it could also be more complex because a lot of it's commercial and it's a big mix. So it's kind of one of those tough ones. So I could see the report priority adjusting those to more of a medium priority based on some of the other outlying neighborhoods as well.
Depending on what everybody thinks. Yeah,
Yep.
okay, that sounds fine, so thank you.
Yeah, and I guess that was a little bit of my take too, is again, thinking about the the primary purpose of this document is to be the baseline that we use to go out and decide where else we need more information. You know, what is the next cultural survey that we get? We're going to be providing this document with any kind of grant request and say this. We've done all this foundational work. This is the area we want to focus on. Here's why. Here's the information behind, you know, the start of it. So, so just to get it out there. I basically kind of ranked some priorities on my own, and they were largely in the older neighborhoods. I just, for the sake of trying to come up with something, I ranked the Bone Farm #1 and the Cannery #2 in terms of priorities, with the Old North being 3. Just thinking about the older neighborhoods that are already kind of, you know, facing some change, and I think that relatively aligns with what you've seen was shown in the report. Again, some of your mediums and highs are maybe like I think the Old North. I think Commissioner Jacoby mentioned it, that maybe medium is not the appropriate priority for that neighborhood. It's so close to downtown Kaufman. You know, there's and the houses are so small that I think there's, you know, some potential for pressure there. I also did. I mean, one of the things that was really great about this is there are a lot of really tiny little houses in this town, and that's kind of cool because I mean, these little tiny historic homes are some of the more affordable homes in the city. Right. And so tying this notion of historic preservation and affordability together, I think is really compelling. And this document does it better than anything else we've had here. Right. So at any rate, that was sort of my thought in terms of starting to prioritize. And then I think I had Brown's Farm 4 and Kitely 5, and then I stopped. But those are my thoughts. Let's see, Commissioner Terrick.
I was going to just jump off what you said when you were talking about Old North and Cannery. I was going to add Kitely to that, but you just said that, so sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Because I had the same thoughts about Kitely as you, so I'm just, sorry.
Okay.
I clicked on too early.
No, all good. I just interrupted myself. Let's see, Commissioner Jacoby.
Just for the record, I think your priority list is perfect, actually. You're thinking what I'm thinking.
Okay. And anyone else have comments about that priority list, or we have general sort of, I don't think this is a votable thing, but if we have general consensus feedback, I think that would be good. Anybody object to that order for any reason? Okay. And you know, beyond that, I'm not sure that it matters, right? After the first 5, if this is even if we get one a year, that's 5 years from now, we'll go through an Envision Longmont update in that time period. I mean, there's just a lot that would happen in that period. Yeah. A
lot happens after 5 years. So.
Yes, especially these days.
Yeah.
So if you can just, and I guess the only other one that would potentially float around in there is that miscellaneous agricultural sites. Yep. And for me, that would be one place where maybe I might bump that up, into #3 or #4, in part because I think those are some of the more in danger, if you will, right? These peripheral areas that people, look at and think it's just blight and we need to get rid of it, right? And that's the first reaction because it's just kind of out there, and that's the easier place to put a 7-Eleven or whatever. I think that's something that we ought to be keeping track of.
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, I'm from small town Iowa, so I was just back in Iowa last week, and there's a lot of places where I remember an old barn sitting there. Now it's a gas station or whatever else. But something to consider too is with those like agricultural sites, since they are kind of scattered and they're smaller, there's always opportunity for like college class projects too. I've done that where I've had a professor that I knew and his class came and they did some survey work, at least at the reconnaissance level, and were able to fill out the forms and it was class projects. So didn't really cost much except some food and, a gift card here or there for gas. So
It's a great
so
idea.
something to consider for some of those that are a little bit more scattered, not like a big robust, but, a professor can keep an eye on, 7, 8 sites versus half 100 or something.
Right. No, that's excellent. Excellent idea. Great. Any other comments on the survey plan? No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for your efforts. Thank you for being receptive to our feedback. And we'll look forward to any other comments that come from any other of the agents, museum and historical society, and then I presume that we'll just get a final version to sort of certify and officially vote on and approve here. And what's the timeline for that?
I'd like to get to you. I'd like to get the file over in a week, just before the holidays. But we also want to get the feedback from the others. So as soon as we get that feedback, we'll just make those quick updates. We'll get all the other updates done, here in the next couple days.
So
Yeah,
the January meeting would be?
I think January meeting's probably reasonable. I'll forward this to the museum and historical society folks and ask them for please, quick turnaround.
Yeah, I mean, it's more just if they have any, we're
you
not
have any
asking for them to,
No.
proofread or detail. It's just an
Just-
overview. Is there anything,
Did we miss?
that somehow we just completely forgot about?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That's
I'd love
the
the
intent.
next one to be kind of your final. And we were joking before, especially with all the accessibility requirements. Once you get a PDF, then you have to go through and make sure everything reads for the accessibility online, which is always a fun challenge. But we'll have that all done so you can post it online and meet all those requirements as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Again, appreciate your effort and appreciate you
Thank
being
you.
able
All.
to come.
Appreciate it.
All right. That is all of the business that we had for this evening. Do any of the commissioners have any additional comments? No? Okay. City Council Rep, Mayor Pack?
I do. Damien's presentation made me think of a question that I would like to ask. Sorry. This is probably for Jennifer. When we get, as council, requests for annexation, is there anyone that goes out to that property to see if there's anything of historical importance on them? Because I know that council doesn't know that.
That is an excellent question, actually. Frequently, in the case of the annexation I referenced earlier, we'll get, staff will take a look at it, and the project planners will ask me, like, hey, is there anything that you're aware of that's significant? I'll check the state database and look and see if there's been anything cataloged. In some cases, the county, Boulder County is a reviewing agency, is a referral agency, as well as Weld County, but Boulder County has a very robust historic preservation program. So we do what we can.
Okay.
Yeah, we definitely do what we can. And where appropriate, we will refer it to the commission to make recommendations. In the case, one of the items, in the case of the barn, the barn over off of Slayton, that particular discussion started before I was here, but I continued it, and we were able to, rather than get a marker or some interpretive thing, they decided they were willing to deed the barn and some to the city in addition to some open space. So yeah, we do what we can to work with property owners and developers to preserve what can be preserved on the site, or otherwise have some sort of recognition of it.
Fantastic. I never thought of that until I saw your presentation, so thank you.
All right, great. Commissioner Fenster, you're out of order, but I'll give you the floor here. Just joking.
I've never been out of order before. Is there any way to formalize what you just talked about as a requirement? Because I gather there is no formal procedure for doing what the mayor has referred to.
So oftentimes in the case of annexations, we would have a requirement that a Phase 1 environmental site assessment be conducted as part of the application. And typically, as part of those Phase 1 ESAs, if there are potential historic resources in the property, it will get flagged as part of that. We'll also take a look at existing properties on the site, as far as, using the county assessor to take a look at building age and such. We do a pretty broad look at properties. I mean, if it's a blank piece of land that doesn't have anything in it, that might not rise to the standard unless something comes up in the ESA that there might be some archaeological work done. It typically is a project by project basis,
But it's still discretionary.
it can be. We do have certain things that we look at and our code requires as far as, historic preservation review. So we, again, typically for larger projects like annexations, there would be a Phase 1 environmental site assessment, and that might flag it. In the case of the Layton project, that's what happened, and staff and the commission basically said we want to see a Phase 2 and do some additional archaeological work and see what's there. So it is case by case, but we do as a general rule look at the properties and identify whether or not we need that additional look.
Would your work be more assured if it were made a requirement and formalized somewhere in a code of some sort?
Not necessarily, simply because there are, we do have our required documents for different application types. Not all development applications would rise to the level of requiring such an assessment. However, for example, in the case of, demolition code, that is definitely codified for, properties within the original town plat. So that is definitely codified. That is something I've worked with our building permit people to really put in place a process to make sure we don't miss these things. So it's a work in progress. It's kind of but unfortunately, the nature of this type of thing is it does come down to case by case, and a lot of times, and many times when we're looking at projects, there definitely aren't historic resources on there. But if there's any question, I'll check the state database and, county assessors information and see what we can find. And again, if it's a type of project that requires a Phase 1 environmental site assessment, that typically will include some mention of whether or not there are any historic resources.
All right, thank you. I, for one, appreciate that we have good staff and they can use their discretion. So I think that's a good thing. All right, wonderful discussion tonight. I think we had a lot of great information thrown at us and some thrown back. So, great evening. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay. We have a second? Okay. Motion by Commissioner Barnard and seconded by Commissioner Jacoby. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.